provincial groups in Canada, in both Manitoba and currently in Ontario, and with the Basic Income Canada Network. Thanks.
Thank you. Dr. White.
Hi everyone. I'm Andrew White. I'm not actually working in an official capacity at the moment. I'm doing some online teaching, presenting at conferences like this, and continuing to do research as well. I was, until last year, a professor of creative industries and digital media at the University of Nottingham's China campus, and for various reasons I've decided to return to the UK. So I'm very much looking forward to presenting at the conference today. I've had a kind of long-running interest in universal basic income, and I try to relate it in some ways to my research on digital media and creative industries. So I look forward to presenting today, although I pre-recorded my session, and of having the discussion later. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And I'm not sure if Brulé Escandel is here. If so, turn on your mic and maybe give yourself an introduction, but and I'll wait maybe a couple of seconds, and if not, I'll introduce Dr. Escandel briefly. All right, that's okay. Dr. Escandel is an affiliate professor and postdoc researcher at the University of Barcelona, Spain, and the University of Braga, Portugal. He is the chair of Hoover d'Éthique économique et sociale, and he has also been an invited researcher at the Carl Polanyi Institute of Political Economy at Concordia University here in Montreal, and at the Center for Applied Philosophy, Politics, and Ethics at the University of Brockton. Okay, so thank you very much. Before I hand this over to our first speaker, Dr. Mauvale, I've been asked to share the mission statement that the volunteer team created in an effort to capture their objectives and aspiration for this Congress. And it goes as follows. We believe that freedom from poverty and human security should be a basic human right. We believe that basic income is the best method of transferring this right into a living reality. The time for basic income has come, so we're here to talk about how we make it happen. We can only achieve this through cooperation and collaboration. Our mission with this Congress was to bring speakers and attendees from all over the world together to take basic income from idea to reality. So with that, I'll hand over the mic to Dr. Mauvale, and we hope you enjoy the session. Thank you very much.
Sorry, I'm just trying to get my screen shared here. I teach online, like I should know how to do all this stuff, but I always struggle a bit. Okay, share screen and share. Is it coming up there, Sarah?
We see the Hoover screen, and I also see my face.
Oh, okay. Just, is that any better?
No, I think you might have the wrong screen or window, possibly.
If you hit stop sharing, Jim, and then try again.
Okay, stop sharing. And I've got the participants up here, and it's kind of taking up half the screen, which is one of my problems. Sorry about this. Okay.
You can change the view to say speaker view, and that should solve that problem.
Okay.
There's also this downward, small downward arrow beside to the left of participants.
Yeah, and it says close window. If you click on the left of participants, you can click on close window. I've had that problem several times too.
That's right.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry about this.
That's okay. So I can see your cursor. The participants 2028. So okay, no. So to the left of participants, there's a small downward arrow.
I can't get the participants button on the bottom because it's got the participants list taking it all up. Here, I'm going to stop sharing.
Okay.
Okay. Now we're getting somewhere. Sorry about all this. Okay, share. I should go to share window. Okay.
We're at the same window.
Yeah. Susan, I sent you the screen, my slides. Would you mind just bringing them up?
Sure. Did you send them me by email?
I did.
Right. Okay. I'll just go get them.
And if Andrew's ready to go and I'm causing a delay here, I mean, he should go ahead if he wants to.
We could actually run Andrew's recorded presentation now.
Sure.
Susan, I know how to do that. If you want to organize James's PowerPoint, and I can do the video. Oh, if you're trying to talk, you're muted.
I've got Andrew's up and ready, so
Okay.
I can go with that, no problem. If you stop sharing your screen, Jim.
Okay.
Okay, and now I need to share mine. This is fun, isn't it?
Oh, it's great fun.
Okay. Right, so I'm going to start sharing my screen, and then I will select the appropriate. Okay, right.
And please, nobody feel bad about it, because we always have trouble like that. Even though people are very experienced, it happens all the time. No problem.
Right.
Thanks,
okay. I am. I've definitely got your YouTube video here, so it's okay. I'm just going to try once more if I can find the Zoom and then share.
Make sure to share sound.
Yeah, I've done that bit. I can't get the Zoom. I can't get the Zoom call back up now. It's gone.
Do you want me to do it? It would be really easy for me.
Yeah, I'll send you the link in the.
It's okay. I have the link up actually.
Right. Okay then.
Yeah. Okay. So, just trying to.
Hi, everyone. As you can see, I'm sitting outside and I'm hoping to finish my recording for the session on Thursday before the sun goes down. So I'm going to talk today about the philosophy of work and how that relates to my ideas about the universal basic income. I should introduce myself. I'm Andy White, and at the moment, so perhaps this is perhaps one of the reasons why I'm arguing for a universal basic income. I was a professor of digital media and creative industries at the University of Nottingham's campus in China until very recently, until the end of last year. But now I've returned permanently to the UK, and it's good to see you all here today. So let me first start by sharing the screen, so you can see my slides. So really, I want to say something about our attitudes towards work. And one of the interesting things I find about our attitudes towards work is that right across the political spectrum, there's this kind of consensus that work is a good thing. If you look at the right of the political spectrum, people's willingness to work is used as a means of distinguishing the so-called deserving poor from the undeserving poor. And if we think about welfare systems, especially in Western Europe, it's often based on the idea that, yes, we should pay for people when they cannot find work, but actually it's desirable if we can get them into work. So for this reason, there's a belief that paying people to do nothing is something that should be avoided, and hence those people are often opposed to UBI. On the left too, there's this sense that having a job bestows dignity on the worker. And therefore on the left, a society which does not try to provide good jobs for everyone is failing in some respects. So insofar as it breaks the link between working hard and self-worth, elements of the right and the left are, I think it's fair to say, traditionally suspicious of UBI. So for instance, in the UK, I should say in Britain, because I think it might be different in Scotland, but certainly in England and Wales, the Conservative and Labour parties, to my understanding, are opposed to a universal basic income, and that's not really surprising. This paper, as you probably can gather, is going to challenge that view of work, and I'll just briefly, summarize what I'm going to say. So I'm going to talk about a history of work, then I'm going to go on to look at whether or not we can sustain meaningful employment, at the current level, and then I'm going to finish by looking at what we might refer to as positive attitudes towards non-work. So I've talked about negative attitudes towards non-work, which are very prevalent at the moment, but I want to, towards the end of this session, talk about how we might think about non-work in a more kind of positive way. To do that, I'm going to start by looking at this society, the Jhinsa, I think is how you pronounce it. I think they're based in this Sahara Desert, developed one of the most stable and long-lasting societies on Earth. And it's basically a hunter-gatherer society. And as with many hunter-gatherer societies, what the Jhinsa did was they generated enough work to satisfy immediate wants. So they weren't worried about projecting into the future and thinking, well, what work do we need to do for the next 5 years or whatever. They simply did enough work to satisfy their immediate wants. If there was nothing that immediately needed to be done, therefore, then they would rest. They wouldn't have the kind of impulse that we have, whereby we think, if I'm not working, somehow this is problematic. They would say, well, if we only need to work 15 hours a week to do what we need to do, then that's absolutely fine. A lot of this information about the Jhinsa, as you can see, I've taken from James Sussman's very interesting book, Work, A History of How We Spend Our Time. And as Sussman, but people like Harari have documented as well, what we find is the emergence of farming involved the creation of surpluses. So once we move from hunter-gatherer societies to farming societies, then that involved the creation of surpluses, which meant thinking about the future as much as thinking about the present. And this, in a sense, this move from hunter-gatherer societies to farming societies was the beginning of the modern obsession with growth and productivity. And in that kind of society, more work would increase productivity, and hence, in a sense, there was no upper limit on the hours people would work. So the Jhinsa would say, well, we only need to satisfy our immediate wants, so we'll work 15 hours a week, and that's fine. Once we move into a farming society and work is very much linked to productivity, then there's no upper limit, in a sense, on the hours that we can work. And in many ways, as I'll go on to suggest later in the paper, that's problematic. So thus began a number of things. The exploitation of nature in order to create these surpluses. We in a sense, I say people generally were exploiting nature. It brought in theories of economic scarcity. So when we talk about economics now, it wasn't about satisfying immediate wants. It was about dealing with economic scarcity. The sense as well that time is money in relation to work. So the concept of time that Jhinsa have will be very much different. Time in a sense doesn't matter. As long as we do what we need to do, that's fine. In a kind of productive modern capitalistic society, of course, time is money, and we think about work in relation to that in a different way. let's go back and think about this in relation to the introduction of something like a nascent UBI, which is what we saw at Speen Hamland, which was a part of, I always forget where Speen Hamland was, but it was in Berkshire, or still is in Berkshire, in fact. So local magistrates in Speen Hamland in 1795 introduced a scheme to top up poor workers' wages to subsistence levels. So this is not exactly a universal basic income because it's just targeted at workers, but it's something similar to what is being advocated today. Importantly, it did not distinguish between the deserving and undeserving poor. And because of that, classical economists who would talk about, you know, economic scarcity and stuff like that, like David Ricardo, was opposed to this scheme as he believed it would make workers idle. And the scheme, in many respects, I mean, retrospectively, people have now said it was actually quite successful, but at the time, people thought that it was not successful. And the Royal Commission report reported as such, saying that this made workers unproductive. You know, there was a decrease in productivity, which was extremely problematic at that time. And that was what the Royal Commission reported in around that time. And really, the 1834 Poor Law was a manifestation of what was in the Royal Commission report, and it essentially ended this particular experiment. If we look at Carl Polanyi's analysis of the Speen Hamland program, he concludes that the rural laborers' wages were reduced because employers realized that their underpayment of their workers would invariably be matched by the amount the authorities topped up. So there's a sense in which unethical employers would deliberately underpay their workers because they knew that the public purse would pick up the tab. And this was the view of not just of people like Ricardo and Polanyi, but also Marx and Engels as well, this idea that the workers were being exploited in some way. Despite this, later analysis showed that production had not actually dropped during the Speen Hamland experiment. And despite that empirical evidence that production had not decreased, these attitudes towards something like topping up income or even a universal basic income persist even to this day, I think, across, as I said at the start, across the political spectrum, from right to left. I think there's a question, though, about whether we can sustain employment at the level that we have it at the moment. Because if we can't, then I think it opens up more opportunities for thinking about how we might introduce a universal basic income. So what I find interesting here is that there was a global decline in the percentage of those of working age in employment from 1993 to 2020, from 62.2% to 58%. So often we think about unemployment and we look at the figures and we think the figures are going down. But if you look at employment, how many people are being employed, then the number has gone down considerably in the last 30 odd years. The participation rate in the US labor market reached its zenith in the late 1990s and has been falling ever since. The doubling of those receiving disability, but if I can just stop for a minute, because I can see my daughter looking at me and she's going to ask me to go to dinner. I'll be about 5 minutes, okay? Okay, Vanessa, I'll see you soon. Sorry about that. So there's been a doubling of those receiving disability benefits as a percentage of the overall working age population from 1994 to 2015, and many of whom have dropped out of the job market permanently. So in a sense, we're saying that not as many people are being employed now as they were 20 or 30 years ago. A lot of that, of course, is due to automation. And what we see here is there is now, or there has been over the last 20 or 30 years, an increasing gap between improving productivity and laggardly wage growth in the most advanced economies. So wage growth is not keeping pace with overall increases in overall wealth, with labor income as a share of overall global income falling from 53% in 2004 to 51% in 2017. So automation may or may not cause the loss of many thousands of jobs, but I think what it is doing for sure is reinforcing this increasing divide between productivity and wage levels. it's also, if you think about this in relation to wage growth, in relation to overall wealth, automation and digital technologies have the effect of concentrating wealth into ever more into the kind of richest people and richest organizations into society. So we can see these kind of trends that have been happening over time, certainly since the mid 1990s. Even where jobs are not lost, as more productive functions are taken on by the machine, humans take a larger proportion of what the late David Graeber talks about as bullshit jobs. So it might be the case that we say, well, actually, you know, we're not losing as many jobs due to automation as we think we might. But at the same time, if we look at the quality of those jobs, we might think, well, jobs are being created just to keep people employed. If we actually look at how efficient or effective these jobs are, sometimes they are not. And it wouldn't even be better to say, well, this job is not really needed. Of course, at the moment, if you say that, then you're making someone unemployed. But if you provide a universal basic income, then that's a means of saying, well, a whole raft of jobs perhaps can go. And instead of having people in jobs that they feel are worthless, and indeed, which then makes them feel as though what they're doing is in a sense worthless, then wouldn't it be better just to get rid of those jobs and then, in a sense, you know, replace incomes with a universal basic income? So I think what these trends do is undermine the idea that hard work is necessarily rewarding. And given work's social importance, this could be, as I say, an existential problem, especially as most people believe that, you know, having work is worthwhile beyond the kind of economic utility. You know, it has a social value as well. If we get rid of work, then that could be extremely problematic. But what I'm kind of suggesting here, that I think we should embrace non-work and think about how we might open up the possibility of productive forms of non-work, which will be funded, of course, by UBI. And I think, you know, in many ways, we have to embrace what I would refer to as laziness. I find myself in my present circumstances, because I'm actually not working at the moment, although I am, you know, giving this presentation, I'm still writing and I'm still doing some online teaching. But in a sense, psychologists like Josh Cohen, or psychoanalysts like Josh Cohen and Daniel Kahneman, have highlighted the fact that human beings in many respects are essentially lazy. So why not, in a sense, embrace that rather than trying to all the time make ourselves productive when sometimes it's not really appropriate? If our labor is no longer an effective means of driving economic productivity because of things like automation, then why not embrace non-economic alternatives? This might involve things like volunteering, parenting. I'm doing quite a lot of parenting at the moment. I'm finding it very worthwhile, much more worthwhile actually than what I was previously doing in my work as an academic. You know, and this is what Nan Craig refers to as work as obligation rather than work as a form of economic productivity. And I can say from personal experience, I think this is very rewarding. It might also involve doing very little as part of a degrowth economic model that makes society more environmentally sustainable. So we all saw I think it was I can never remember the acronym, I think it's the ICSS report on the global climate emergency last week. And it seems to me that one of the things we need to do is become more active, is to not kind of use up as many resources as we have done in the past. So in a sense, embracing non-activity is a good idea for the future of the planet going forward. And I think those are the kind of things that we need to do. I think it's important, if we're arguing for UBI, not just to argue in the kind of economic sense, not just to argue in relation to work, because a lot of people will say, well, actually, people will still continue to work. They will still perhaps even work as productively and as at the same level, even if we introduce a UBI. And I can understand why people do that. They're quite defensive when they're trying to defend this concept. But actually, I think we must also find ways of talking about how we can incentivize, you know, kind of voluntary types of activity, but also how we can kind of philosophize and kind of think about how non-activity is sometimes quite useful for society going forward as well. Okay, I've rambled quite a bit there, and I hope I haven't gone over time. I'm going to check this recording later to see if I have. But obviously, I will be present at the session itself, and I'm willing and quite happy to take questions and involve myself in the discussion on Thursday. So see you all then. Thank you.
Great. Thanks very much. Questions for Andrew. We had a few come in through the Q&A function. Yeah, Susa.
The format, Sarah, now is that we do all the questions at the end.
Oh, do we? Okay. That's good. Susa's actually done this before. This is my first time hosting, so he knows kind of how it goes. So I guess then we'll just move on to Jim's presentation.
Yeah, sure. I'll just pop the screen share on if that's okay. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, thanks for your help with that, Susa.
Yeah, here we go. Right. Okay. And I'll put it on the slide master view for you. That is.
Okay, thank you very much. So Andrew's presentation was fascinating and all kinds of interesting questions. He was kind of looking at the big philosophical picture to a large extent. This presentation, I guess, is complementary in the sense that we're looking at what unions, and we're looking at unions in Canada, what they think about basic income, on the premise, I guess, that if we're going to, in the real policy and social program world, attain some kind of basic income, it will be important to have progressive allies in that struggle, including labor unions. So I'll just acknowledge quickly that I have a couple of collaborators on this project, Dr. Sid Frankel, who's at the Congress, and also Dr. Mohammed Khan, who are both my colleagues in the Faculty of Social Work. So maybe the next slide, please, Susan. And I'll just quickly acknowledge that we work at the University of Manitoba, that's on the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe, Cree, Ojibwe, Dakota, and Dene nations, and also the homeland of the Métis Nation. And we struggle in Canada with the history of colonialism and racism, and trying to reach towards truth and reconciliation. So we try to bear that in mind as we do all of our work. So next slide, please. Okay, I'm just going to quick, I mean, this topic of what do labor unions think about basic income, it's not a new topic. There's been initially not too much, but in more recent years, a greater amount of work done on it, and debates and discussions held about how to get unions, if we're promoting basic income, how to get unions on board in the struggle to attain it. Going back, well, I guess 16 years ago now, Yannick Vanderborg did kind of an initial survey of what unions at that stage were thinking about basic income, and the results were pro and con, positive and negative. He was looking at European unions and Canadian unions. Another strong advocate of thinking positive thoughts in unions about basic income is Eric Olin Wright, late famous sociologist who, I mean, he wrote about this going back many years, but there's a recent reference from about 4 years ago where Eric talked about basic unions should in fact get on board with basic income, because it really shifts the balance of power in the labor capital relationship towards unions. It's one way he used to talk about it was basic income can be seen as an immense strike fund if workers are struggling for better conditions and better wages. So there's those kind of that broad philosophical argument that Wright made. In terms of what actually happens in social policy debates, just using Canada as an example, unions have not, by and large, and for most of the last 25 or 30 years, been really enthused about basic income. In fact, they've had misgivings and sometimes have expressed strong opposition to it. And I think in the particular Canadian context, this goes back to Royal Commission on Our Economic Future that did its work in the mid-1980s, the Macdonald Commission. It recommended free trade with the United States, which we got, and now it includes Mexico. The Commission also recommended a form of basic income that they called the Universal Income Security Program, which was a very minimalist version of basic income in which many other valuable social programs and social insurance schemes would be canceled. And the unions at the time in Canada, I think rightfully so, strongly opposed this version of basic income. And it didn't come to pass. But there's long memories in the labor movement, and a lot of Canadian unions, when you talk to them about basic income, they still think about the Macdonald Commission version of it. So there's this kind of Macdonald Commission effect. More recently, Troy Henderson, who was also at this conference with a colleague, proposed a way of getting basic income, or getting unions to sign on to basic income by tying it to labor-friendly policies, especially a job guarantee. And more recently in Canada, there's been some work done. It's sort of new and interesting work, but there's been some work done on a kind of social democratic version of basic income by Angela McEwen and colleagues at the Broadbent Institute. A famous Canadian labor economist, Jim Stanford, has been talking more positively about basic income in recent years. And of course, going south of the border, Andy Stern, the retired president of the Service Employees International Union, has written a book actually making a strong case, a labor case, union-oriented case for basic income. So maybe the next slide, please, Susa. So in this research that I'm conducting with Sid and Mohammed, we've managed to do some interviews. We expect to do more, and also review some literature, review a bunch of literature on what unions are saying about basic income. So it's research in progress, but thus far we've come up with, I think, at least half a dozen key themes about what unions are thinking and saying about basic income. So the list is here, but I'll go through each one individually. So we'll go to the next slide, please.
Sorry.
So one key concern that comes up in the interviews we've been doing, and also in some of the documents, is that union people, and we're talking here about mostly union leaders. We haven't had a chance yet to talk to too many rank and file members. They're concerned about what they perceive to be the ambiguity or the vagueness of basic income. You know, it seems like a general principle, perhaps a good idea, but what do you really mean by it? I mean, we've had these kinds of discussions. We always have them at PN congresses, and sometimes you get very different ideas about what a basic income is or should be by both advocates and opponents. So this confusion of tongues, as I refer to it here, has led to a real concern, I think a reasonable concern, that a bad version of basic income would leave the most economically vulnerable, including perhaps working people and especially the working poor, worse off. So next slide, please. Sorry, we just have to go back one, Susa, to number 2.
Oh, right. Oh, dear. Right, let's see what I can do. That might, I
If
might
you had
have,
presenters who knew how to do this by themselves, we wouldn't have these issues.
I might have to,
If you press the
I'll
back
try it.
arrow.
I'll tell you what, I'll take it from the top again, yeah? See if that
Okay,
works.
sure.
Except I've got something in the way now. Oh, no. Right, okay.
Or maybe Sarah can pick it up from there.
Okay, right. So I'll go slowly. Tell me
Yeah.
when to stop.
Okay, done that. Done that. Keep going. Okay, there we are, number 2. So I guess arising from the first issue of ambiguity is the second issue of whether basic income supplements or replaces existing income security programs. And the Canadian labor movement, I think, rightfully so, claims some credit and fought hard over many years to put in place programs, social insurance programs in particular, like the Canada Pension Plan for retiring workers, and what we now call employment insurance, used to be called unemployment insurance, for people who have lost their jobs. So they worry that, of course, if we come in with a basic income program that takes the place of existing social insurance programs, that once again, people will be worse off, and economic insecurity will increase for working people. So the third worry on this slide is that it also opens the door towards privatization of public services. That if we just have a minimal basic income in place, that whether they admit it or not, this will open the door to neoliberal governments and governments that have an austerity agenda to start cutting in-kind services such as healthcare, elder care, childcare, and social housing. Once again, people will become more market dependent and will have to buy more on the market. So even their basic income, which isn't a great amount, will leave them worse off. Now, next slide, please. Okay, there's a whole host of, I'll just go through this quickly. There's a whole host of issues and concerns about how would basic income be designed and delivered, like the nuts and bolts of how it will actually work. Now here in Canada, I guess we're a bit heretical. Most of the national basic income organizations, in fact, I think all of the national basic income organizations are shooting, at least in the medium term, for an income tested version of a basic income guarantee. And I know that's not consistent. We're going to have discussions about this at the Congress about whether this even counts as a basic income, and basic income, according to some, has to be an upfront payment of a benefit. But we've kind of been advocating for the income tested approach to it here. And I mean, the income tested approach is not without its challenges in terms of how it should be delivered. You don't want people not getting money when they need it, or having to make big paybacks when their income arises at a later date. So those are issues to be worked out in the income tested model, and unions think and I worry about that. And once again, how does basic income articulate with existing income support programs? All of the advocates in Canada, I don't think any of them are advocating for abolition of programs like the Canada Pension Plan or employment insurance, the social insurance programs. And they see basic income kind of filling a gap, and income tested basic income filling a gap and reaching the people that don't qualify for the social insurance programs. Next slide, please. Then we could spend a lot of time talking about potential costs and benefits, but I'll highlight two things here. One worry by labor unions and the left more broadly in Canada is the fact that this is kind of the Trojan horse argument, that if will implement a basic income at some level that's probably not overly generous, but this will open the door to cost cutting and decline of funding for public services and so on. And governments may or may not be explicit about that, what's happening, but that's a worry. On the benefit side, for instance, we've interviewed somebody from a nurses union and representing workers in the healthcare field. This particular informant saw, the potential health benefits, adequate income as a social determinant, positive social determinant of health. I think, whether they're in the healthcare sector or whether in the broader social service sector, people working with people in need want to see their conditions improve. So if we can provide them with an income to improve quality of life and help people thrive rather than just survive, that union workers who, for the most part, embrace progressive political goals, want to see that outcome. Okay, next slide, please. Now, a last general theme that I'll focus on is how basic income, if implemented in some version, would affect the work that's done by people that are currently delivering social assistance. Here in Canada, that's our kind of last resort, means-tested program of income support. One interview was conducted with, well, actually we've done a couple of interviews with people, union leaders representing that sector of social assistance caseworkers. And we're getting interesting differing views. I think in one case, one union was open to the idea of thinking about social, in basic income as a better model to provide people with income support when they don't have other means. In another case, the union has taken a very strong stand against basic income and wasn't happy, and doesn't want to see governments go down that road and see it as a way to basically lay off social assistance caseworkers. So there's somewhat differing views, and in both cases, the unions sort of said, well, our caseworkers they deliver a program to deal with the complex needs of poverty, and they help people out in non-monetary ways. That was the claim by the union leaders. However, I think there's facts that contradict this. I mean, there's lots of evidence in Canada, certainly, that social assistance rates are totally inadequate, don't even come near to reaching poverty lines. And secondly, that the way social services delivered is that it's dehumanizing, oppressive, and stigmatized. So when I was doing these interviews, I was kind of wondering what kind of experiences the union leaders were representing, because not to think negatively about the motives of people that are social assistance caseworkers, but many do perhaps have less enlightened views and are okay working in a very dehumanizing system, or at least don't see a way of escaping it. And next slide, please. And there was a concern, once again, a reasonable concern, that often with social assistance, there's other benefits tied up with it, to do with prescription drugs, dental care, prosthetics, perhaps help with child care costs, and so on. And concerned by the unions representing social assistance caseworkers that if you just give people money, they'll lose these additional sort of in-kind benefits. Of course, the contradictory fact to that is that in principle, there's no reason you couldn't separate the two. I think we had a discussion this morning in one of the sessions about UBI plus, where those kind of supports would be, for people with disabilities, for instance, would be delivered separately from the actual income support. And in fact, we have an existing program like that in Manitoba. It's a housing subsidy that everybody on social assistance is automatically assessed as to whether or not they need it. But people who are not on social assistance might be eligible too. Next slide, please. So here's this is, say it's research that we're still working on, but here's sort of a tentative typology of union positions on basic income. It's kind of a continuum here from 1 through 4. The number 1, the people who are strongly opposed. Number 2, people in the union movement who have kind of what I call a laborist productivist faith that unionized paid work is what bestows human dignity, and is kind of and any kind of income support should just be a fallback for those who can't engage in paid labor. Thirdly, that there's been maybe an increasing number of union people that have been more curious and expressing some conditional support for it. And finally, a few people in the labor movement that really have the, I guess, positive radical view that basic income can provide a guaranteed economic floor and can be a way to decommodify human labor and expand our definition of work to include the socially necessary and valuable work that people do outside the labor market, care work, community service, etc. And next slide, please. So I'll end here. I think there might be another slide, but questions we're curious about as we proceed with this research is, are there differences in opinion within the labor movement about basic income? I think there clearly are. It's just we need to sort of document and understand them better. Maybe private and public sector unions have somewhat different views. Maybe there's gender differences. Maybe there's, I think we have some inkling that perhaps older, especially white male workers that have been, come out of a work background where they had a standard employment relationship, a full-time steady job, they're less inclined towards basic income. But maybe women who have always been more involved in part-time and short-term labor due to care responsibilities in the home, or just prejudice and discrimination in the labor market, are more open to thinking about models like basic income. Is there an age difference between younger and older people, especially maybe younger people who engage in precarious work and are willing to think outside the box in terms of the traditional collective bargaining model and ways to supplement paid income with programs like basic income? And oh, sorry, I think there's one more slide. I'll just end there. There's the last one is kind of my wrap-up point. So here are the things I think we need to be thinking about. I think in working with labor, listen carefully and respectfully. Recognize that there's lots of different views in the complex house of labor about basic income. But also identify and work with pro basic income elements in the labor movement. We've had discussion, and I think actually Andrew referred to it in his presentation, of how basic income might be helpful to people working in the creative sector that have precarious employment and need time and flexibility. And also recently in Canada, we had a campaign by the Canadian Union of Postal Workers to try and organize food couriers, car and bicycle food couriers, that actually was making some progress. But again, the company they were trying to organize, Fedora, which is based in Europe, if I'm not mistaken, decided to close up shop in Canada, thereby undercutting the union organizing efforts. So I think the future of union organizing with the precariat is absolutely crucial, and maybe in that sector there'll be more interest in and support for basic income kind of programs. So thanks very much. I'll leave it there. Hope I didn't go over time.
Thanks very much, Jim. I think we are missing a speaker as far as I can tell. And Brule and Eskandel, feel free to interrupt me if you're there. But I think given he's not here, we can move into the question and answer period. So I think what I'll do, there's been a number of really good questions that have rolled in for the Q&A, but I can also see a lot of people who asked them are actually in the audience. So I'd like to maybe invite people to pose their questions. You can stick your hand up, but I also can see, for instance, Claudia, you've posed a number of really good questions. Maybe we could start with you.
Yes, not so good a speaker, but I'll try to do it. So I first had a question for Andrew. So and for everyone, of course, but so it was, as said, the idea that workers could be exploited so that the public purse would pick up the gap is an argument against UBI that is often raised. How could we address that one? How could we oppose to that argument? I don't know if that question is clear enough. Is Andrew there? Yeah, he is. So yeah, I'm not sure he is because his video is not on.
Yeah, his video might be frozen, but maybe Jim, maybe you can address that question just while Andrew's video might be resolving.
I have one for specifically for Jim, maybe if it's better.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, can't seem to find it. Oh yeah, so I was, that was more like an observation. I was thinking the essential workers have been very impacted by the pandemic, as we all know. And I wonder if this could be like an opportunity for conversion to our cause.
No, that's a very good question, Claudia. I didn't have time to get into it in my presentation, but during the pandemic last year, actually, the federal government rolled out something called the COVID benefit to tide people over when they lost their jobs, when unemployment rates skyrocketed during early stages of the lockdown. It was called the Canada Emergency Relief Benefit, Recovery Benefit, CERB as we call it. And it's sort of a basic income-ish kind of benefit. It was generous. It was like $2,000 a month. It was relatively unconditional, relatively easy and quick to get. Yeah, it had its problems. It wasn't a perfect basic income by any means. But I mean, I think it had a very positive effect, and I think the federal government deserves some credit. They were being pushed by the party to the left, the NDP, to make the benefit amount sufficient, or at least closer to sufficiency. This, I think, within the Canadian public generally, but certainly within labor unions, I think this modeled, how more universal, more unconditional income support programs can actually lead to very positive outcomes. In this case, people survived. So maybe that was an object lesson for the future as we continue to have these debates about basic income kind of approaches.
Yeah, thank you, Jim, for that. Yeah, that'd be great. That'd be really great to see how we can convert them, because they all tried the good taste of basic income kind of a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then I see that Andrew is back.
Yeah,
so...
sorry. That's why I pre-recorded my session, because we have a problem with the internet connection here. But yeah, I'm back. Yeah.
Okay, so may I ask my other question?
Feel free.
Sarah?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so I asked my other question, and then after someone else can go ahead.
Okay.
So my question for you, Andrew, was let me read someone else's question. Sean Kavanagh asked the question first for you, and it said as follows: the contemporary. It can be seen on the Q&A section if you want to read it also, but I'm reading it. The contemporary expression work-life balance rolls easily off the tongue and is embedded in general use. Given that it equates both aspects, is it an example of false equivalence that we perpetuate each time we use it? Work, life, yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be. I think what I want to kind of get across in relation to work is that what we really should be doing is kind of creating as much work as is needed rather than work to sustain employment for every single person for 40 hours a week. And I think that's understandably what we do at the moment. You know, we don't want large numbers of people unemployed, which is something I share as well. But it might be the case, especially with automation, that we don't actually need all those jobs. We might only need, in a workforce of 50 million, we might only need 25 million people working full time. So that might mean that people can work 20 hours a week, or it might mean that 25 million people don't have to work. It might be the case in terms of the environment as well, that it's not a good idea for us to be doing all this kind of productive activity if it's going to cause further problems for the environment. So that's the way I kind of look at it. I think we have to change our mentality about work. And that's how I would think about the work-life balance, you know, to work to support life on this planet, really, than rather than think about work as something that's individual, that's kind of very neoliberal, something that will make me very happy, as it were. You know, I think we need to be thinking about wider society, and if people are not going to work, then we need to find some ways of supporting them. And of course, the universal basic income at the moment seems to me to be the best way of doing that.
Thanks for that, Andrew. So we'll move on to a few other questions. I did notice that Sean has a hand up, but I know that was Sean's question. So I think.
Can I just add something just quickly?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, just very quickly. I'm viewing in from New Zealand, where we have Maori people. They have an expression spoken very boldly with confidence, "Te hei Maori ora," which translates to "Behold, there is life." Now, I suppose you say that expression, "Behold, there is work," it just wouldn't have the same ring to it. And that's the reason for my question, that, you know, we have this false equivalence that we overvalue the sphere of work and we undervalue the sphere of life, you know, and that's something we need to take in mind, really. That's the reason for my question. Thanks.
Thanks, Sean. I'm just going to go and read some questions off the Q&A just to maybe move things along. So Vivian Storland, her comment, or his comment, is an observation on which I wish to draw your views. We need a redefinition of work to take account of all activities in which people are engaged, as opposed to labor law's premise, which is employment. A new philosophy of work, as Andrew mentioned, is a great expression. UBI is an essential precondition for making this paradigm change a reality. Do you have comments on that observation?
I would say, obviously, broadly, I agree. But as I pointed out at the beginning of the paper, I think it's very difficult, because I think it's both on the right and the left. You have this very strong connection between work and self-worth. So on the right, it's a very negative thing. You know, if people don't work, then, you know, what are they doing? Are they being lazy, to put it crudely? But on the left as well, I think you have, where you would expect kind of more progressive views about this, you also get the sense that, you know, work is linked, and Jim mentioned this as well, to in what he was saying with the union members. Work is very much linked to dignity. It's not just economic security, it's dignity. If I don't work, you know, in a sense, what am I going to do? Is that going to impact on my self-worth, my self-esteem in some way? So I think I would agree, but I think getting to a position where we persuade a large proportion of people within any society, it is actually quite difficult, more difficult than perhaps we think.
Yeah, that's a really interesting question. I guess my view would be that we need to be thinking about work in a more broad sense, that you know, all of us have to do work, and a lot of it is unpaid work. And in fact, for many people, including women, maybe the bulk of what they do as adults is unpaid work, care work. And they need to have equity and be supported in the paid labor market. But I'm really in favor of breaking down that the bifurcation, that division between labor we do in the workforce for pay and caring work that we do or community work that we do that's unpaid, and think about the whole package as work. I guess I go back to Marx's old notion of homo faber, man or human beings have an intrinsic desire to and find fulfillment in work that is dignified and non-alienating. And that needs to include the work that we do, that we undertake voluntarily, that's not paid.
I think those are really good points and very consistent as well with sort of these notions of beneficial work and harmful work, right? I think Cindy Lirondell introduced that concept in one of her pieces on guaranteed livable income. This is going to be a couple of questions for Jim. How much political clout do unions exert? Enough to be meaningful regardless of the position they take? That's a question from Richard Caputo.
Yes, very good question. No easy or quick answer, but I mean, part of it relates to the clout of labor unions, which is one indicator of that is union density. What percentage of the workforce is represented by organized unions and engaged in collective bargaining? And last time I looked in Canada, it was hovering maybe a little under 30%. Or a little under 40%, but in other countries such as the US, it's maybe half of that. But of course, in Europe, historically, unions there's been higher union density, more workers represented by unions. So, and in some places, of course, unions have direct political levers with labor or social democratic parties, and they may or may not be in power. But I mean, that's one clout. So. I mean, it really depends on the context, but if you're in a situation where labor has some clout, it's really important to have them on board with progressive social policy, including, I guess, for most people in this session, that they support basic income. So I think we've been neglecting them. I think sometimes we kind of have kind of fuzzy philosophical notions about basic income that, we won't need to work anymore and we can just let the robots do all the work. And I mean, I'm caricaturing a bit here, but I think we have to have a really meaningful and grounded engagement with unions to, move forward to try and achieve more progressive policies like basic income.
Andrew, anything to add to that? Oh, you're on mute if you're.
No, I think James has articulated it much better than I could, so I think I'll leave it there. Yeah.
Well, I'm going to actually follow up with another question from Richard, and he asks, to what extent is it realistic to expect unions to speak with one voice regarding the adoption or rejection of the basic income guarantee?
I don't expect there to be a unitary monolithic view or voice certainly within the Canadian labor movement. But I think it was ever thus, although I balanced that a bit with the idea that unions here in Canada, at least, have for the most part had a more social unionist view, where they see, unions, the welfare of one is the welfare of all, and even unions have a history of advocating for progressive social policies that reach everybody in society, not just union members, like healthcare or public pensions or so on. So, I mean, I think we can get perhaps buy-in at some level of advocating for more universal and unconditional income support. Whether we won't get the majority of unions, buying into a particular version of what we might see as progressive basic income design. So I guess that's the way I would answer that.
I'm going to kind of just insert one little kind of burning question that I have in here. It's like it's a flame. It's not really a burning question, but you know, I do keep track of the basic income conversation in Canada, and I wonder, I mean, what do you think it would take for some of these kind of labor organizers to move on over to the other side? Like, I know John Clark of the Ontario Coalition Against Poverty, he's very he's made his objections known to the idea of a basic income. What do you think it would take for that crew to reconsider?
Well, I think some people were not going to necessarily change their minds. One key point is that we've had basic income-like programs in place for decades in Canada. As I mentioned in the presentation briefly, we've had things like the Canada Child Benefit, the Old Age Security Guaranteed Income Supplement for seniors. We've got very small programs for working age people. Now, these are all kind of, for the most part, negative income tax kind of mechanisms in play. But I mean, certainly the OASGIS has led to a measurable decrease in seniors' poverty and to the depth of seniors, decrease in the depth of seniors' poverty in Canada. So, nothing succeeds like success. So maybe if we can build from these, we may get people who are not adamantly opposed more on board.
Sounds good. I see Claudia's hand up, but before I get to you, I'm just going to pose a question that was asked by Diane Pagan. Hello, Diane. It's nice to see you here. And she asked, how active are social workers in the movement for UBI in Canada? And Andrew, you can probably answer that for your context as well.
Oh, do you want me to go first, or?
Maybe she asks about how active social workers are for UBI in Canada. Maybe we'll start with Jim,
Okay.
and then we'll go for Andrew.
There was a really interesting session yesterday morning, presentation on attitudes of social workers towards basic income. I can't remember the presenter's name. I think there's been some increasing support within the social work profession for basic income. I mean, we're fortunate here in Canada. The Canadian Association of Social Workers has actually formally endorsed basic income and occasionally writes letters to the Prime Minister saying that we should implement a version of basic income. But I'm not sure other national groups have got on board, and I think there needs to be a lot more grassroots discussion among social workers and other human service workers about the need to advocate for a basic income approach to income security.
Great. Diane, did you have a sort of a follow-up question, or it's nice to see you?
No,
Hi, nice to see you guys too. I don't really have a follow-up question. I just wanted to point out that in the US in 1964, the National Association of Social Workers officially
Oh, Diane, I think your audio's cut out there.
endorsed a guaranteed annual income on, not means tested, universal. That's I don't really have any other comment except thank you.
Andrew, did you have anything to add?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know what the situation is in the UK with regards to social workers, but I mean, Diane's point there about means testing, I would imagine that social workers will be opposed to means testing in relation to benefits. So in that sense, universal basic income might be quite attractive to them.
Great, thanks very much. Okay, we have 15 minutes left in the session, so I'm going to invite Claudia if you would like to pose another question.
Yeah, I have an answer to that point raised by Diane regarding social workers. Actually, in Quebec, we have a social welfare program that nobody has in the rest of Canada. That is a very small amount that's given to people who need it. It's a poverty trap. Unfortunately, it's really badly conceived. It's existing since the 70s, or I think, if I'm not a specialist. But so I would say the social workers here are very aware of the need for basic income, and they really advocate for it in their groups and in their consultation and stuff like that. So it's a strong group. The problem is that they've been working on the topic since 25 years, and they don't see it coming. So they kind of went on to another topic, which is like $15 minimum per year, which is, in my own opinion, nothing. So but yeah, the fact that it takes a long time to advocate for a topic is making some groups impossible to continue. I had a question for Andrew.
Just before you start, I actually made a mistake. The session ends in about 3 minutes. So I think that's actually just enough time for you to pose your question, and we'll close the session after that.
Okay, so Andrew, I wanted to know when you were talking about non-work, does it include invisible work at all or not? Or what?
Yeah, what do you mean exactly by invisible work, Claudia?
Okay, I mean that might be a North American concept that is very like a word that is very used here, but invisible work here is all parenting that you were mentioning.
Oh yeah,
in the video is caring for elders, doing volunteering for things, civic activities and stuff like that. Anything
no, very much so. Yeah, no, very much so. I mean, I think these, in terms of social utility, these are much more important aspects of work than paid work, as it were. And some of this work is paid, of course, but if it's voluntary, I think it's more important than some of the kind of work as occupation that we do. And I think, in a sense, we do have to change that mentality and say that let's focus on what is socially useful rather than what generates a living wage, as it were. If we need to generate a living wage, and that can be done through something like a universal basic income, then let's do that. Let's not just pay people to do jobs which don't have a social utility, and in fact might cause harm, because if I'm driving to work every day to do a job that's not really worth doing, I'm causing a lot of environmental pollution as well. So let's kind of change the way in which we think about work. So those activities you talked about, let's try to support those more than we are at the moment, and let's fund them, rather than funding all this other stuff that really doesn't have the social utility that we should have.
I see, and that's a given to me. But I was asking, like, precisely the concept of non-work that you mentioned in your research. Is it invisible? Is it including this invisible work or not? Like, is it considered non-work still?
I probably wouldn't call that non-work. I mean, I was kind of suggesting, even if, because there's this kind of Malibu surfer syndrome where people will say if you pay people a basic income, they'll just do absolutely nothing. And I was kind of suggesting that in some circumstances that's not necessarily a problem, and that will be kind of real non-work, as it were, because it's not using perhaps as many resources, environmental resources, you would be if you were going into a job. I would say that, obviously, if we had 90% of the population doing absolutely nothing, that would be a problem. But I'm not sure if that would happen anyway. I think there's a bit of a, it's one of those kind of scare stories. So yeah, I wouldn't classify parenting and voluntary work and that as non-work. I would use non-work in a very literal sense. Yeah.
Right, Jim. Quick thoughts on that? Any additional thoughts?
No, I mean, as I mentioned earlier, I tend to see, work in a whole piece of both what we do in the labor market and what we do, in the family and the community, volunteer work, etc. And there's really interesting work been done by, once again, Andrew referenced this, among artists in the creative community, of seeing basic income as a way to value work that I guess starving artists try to do at the moment to enhance the quality of life in our communities and our societies.
I wonder if
So-
we could make space for Peter. Peter has a question. That'd be really nice. if he
Yeah,
has a
just
short
an
question.
observation.
That'd be great.
It may be that the problem with union people is that their job and their political parties depend on people being in labor unions, which involves having jobs, right? So that may be a question of basic cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, that's a good last word, isn't it?
So if we're,
I mean,
yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
that's it. I know we're getting overtime here. I mean, that's a tendency, but I mean, there's lots of elements in the labor movement that really have this broader social unionist, social justice view. And I think those are the folks that may be interested in innovative policy ideas like basic income.
So I think what we'll do is just before we close off, I know that we're running over time, but there was a question that came in a little bit later from Luisa Alvarez. I would invite her to ask it, but maybe in the interest of time, I'll just pose it. James, in your view, could professional unions have a disincentive and therefore a bias for basic income, as they will be likely out of a job in the midterm?
No, I don't buy that argument. That came up actually in the whether social workers support UBI session yesterday. I mean, I think people that work in human service occupations, you know, by and large, really want what's best for the people for whom they work. So, if I'm working as a social assistance caseworker, if I can just, you know, get people the money they need under the program, then I could spend more time, you know, helping them with, you know, other issues in their life that they're dealing with, childcare, you know, accessing, you know, transportation, job training, whatever. So, I mean, I think for the most part, no human service workers are going to work themselves out of jobs with the UBI. I think we can just start doing much more productive and helpful things.
Great. Thanks very much, everybody, for that really rich discussion. Thank you for your questions. I'm just going to remind everybody that we do have a daily roundup session at 6:30 UK time. I think that's 1:30 Eastern Standard Time. Don't know what that is, Manitoba, sorry. Before we close. And if you want to continue the conversation, you can directly message speakers and each other on the Whova platform and carry on any points of interest or share resources. There are ways of answering the Q&A in the chat within the session itself. So with that, I'd like to thank all of the speakers for their time and for sharing their expertise. Thank you very much to my co-moderator, Souza, and we'll see you at the next session.
Yay, thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thanks,
everyone.
Susan.
Great,
Thanks,
very
everyone.
interesting
Tara.
talk.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Bye.